I never thought I would discover the true character of my only son, while hiding in my own home like a thief. But life has a way of revealing truths when we least expect them. It was supposed to be a simple trip to California to meet my newborn great-niece. At 75, I had learned to cherish these moments of family connection, especially after losing Arthur 3 years ago. I was already settled in the departure lounge at Dulles International Airport when I realized I had forgotten something precious. The small mahogany box Arthur had given me years ago, containing not just his father's pocket watch, but also what he had cryptically called my safety key, was still sitting on my dresser at home. Some might call it superstition, but I had carried that box on every important journey since Arthur's death. Call it sentiment or widow's intuition, but something told me I needed it for this trip. The taxi ride back to Georgetown seemed longer than usual, and I found myself studying the familiar brick facades and manicured gardens with unusual attention, as if seeing them for the first time. The house stood quiet and elegant, as always, its federal-style architecture, a testament to Arthur's impeccable taste and our 47 years of building something beautiful together. We had purchased it in 1978 when Arthur's architectural firm finally took off, and I had just been promoted to senior curator at the Smithsonian. It represented everything we had worked for, every sacrifice we had made, every dream we had realized together. I was fishing for my keys when I heard voices drifting from the library. Dan's voice, recognizable even through the thick oak door, mixed with the sharper tones of his fiancée, Chloe. My maternal instinct kicked in, and I started to call out, but something in their tone made me pause. They were discussing me, and not in the way a loving son discusses his aging mother. What I heard next changed everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my only child. Chloe's voice was cutting and direct, lacking any pretense of affection. Dan, we don't have time for games anymore. The creditors are calling me every single day. Mr. Fletcher says if we can prove your mother is losing her mental capacity, we can get guardianship and liquidate this house within 3 months. 3 months, Dan. That's all we need. My son's response was hesitant but not dismissive. But Mom seems fine most of the time. Are you sure this will work? The house is worth almost $2 million, and she's always been sharp about her finances. Sharp? Chloe's laugh was bitter. She mutters about old books and forgets what day it is half the time. A few videos, some neighbor testimonies about her odd behavior, and we're golden. Do you want to lose everything, Dan? Because that's what's going to happen if we don't act fast. Your development projects are bleeding money, and my patience is running out. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they would hear it. This was my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep during thunderstorms, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose college tuition I had paid without question. This was the man I had welcomed into my home when his business struggled, whose wedding I was helping to finance. The conversation continued, each word driving deeper into my chest like ice. I learned about forged medical appointments designed to make me appear confused, about plans to hide my car keys and blame it on memory loss, about consultations with elder care facilities that would drain my assets while keeping me warehoused and manageable. As I tried to process this betrayal, my umbrella slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the foyer like a gunshot. Both voices in the library stopped abruptly. I heard rapid footsteps, and panic flooded my system. Moving with an agility I didn't know I still possessed, I slipped behind the grandfather clock in the corner, pressing myself into the shadows just as Dan and Chloe burst into the foyer. Must have been the wind, Dan muttered, after they found nothing. The old house makes weird noises sometimes. Chloe wasn't satisfied. I could hear her heels clicking against the marble as she searched. We need to be more careful. If she heard us, everything gets complicated. They returned to the library, presumably to continue planning my destruction, but I had heard enough. I managed to slip out through the kitchen door and made my way to my car with shaking hands. The trip to California was forgotten. The baby could wait. Right now, I needed to understand exactly what I was facing and how to protect myself. Instead of calling the airline to cancel my flight, I drove directly to Maya Singh's law office. Maya had been one of my graduate students 20 years ago when I was still teaching part-time at Georgetown University. She had specialized in estate and elder law, partly because of conversations we had about the vulnerable position many aging people found themselves in with their families. Maya took one look at my face and canceled her afternoon appointments. As I recounted what I had overheard, I watched her expression shift from concern to anger, and finally to the cold calculation I remembered from her graduate school days, when she was working through a particularly challenging case. "Evelyn," she said when I finished, "this is not just financial elder abuse. This is a coordinated conspiracy to defraud you of your assets and your autonomy. But here's what they don't know. Arthur was brilliant, and he saw this coming. The next morning, I found myself at the bank where Arthur and I had kept our safety deposit box for decades. The bank manager, Mrs. Patterson, had known us for years and greeted me warmly. But as I was signing the access log, I noticed another familiar signature, just 3 entries above mine. Daniel Reed had been here yesterday, attempting to access the box as my authorized representative. Mrs. Patterson noticed my confusion. "Mr. Reed was quite insistent yesterday," she explained. "He claimed you had sent him to retrieve some documents. But our policy is clear. Only the primary account holder can authorize access when present." He seemed frustrated when I explained this. I could imagine Dan's frustration, but I was grateful for the bank's strict policies. Inside the safety deposit box, beneath our insurance documents and my grandmother's jewelry, lay the sealed envelope Arthur had placed there 6 months before his death. He had been battling cancer then, though he kept the worst of his pain hidden from me with characteristic stoicism. Back at Maya's office, we opened Arthur's envelope together. His handwriting was still strong and clear, a reminder of the man who had always thought several steps ahead in everything he did. "My dearest Evelyn," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are facing challenges I hoped you would never have to endure alone. I have watched our son carefully over the years, and I fear that his character has not developed as we hoped. His relationship with money has always troubled me, and his choice of romantic partners suggests he is easily influenced by those who do not have your best interests at heart." The letter went on to detail specific instructions for a trust arrangement that would be triggered if anyone attempted to challenge my mental competency or gain unauthorized control of our assets. Arthur had anticipated this exact scenario and had built legal safeguards I knew nothing about. Maya whistled softly as she read the trust documents. "Your husband was thorough. If Dan tries to get guardianship, this trust activates automatically. The house goes into a protected status. Your assets transfer to a trust managed by me, and Dan receives only a modest monthly allowance until he can demonstrate financial stability and emotional maturity. There's even a provision that if he attempts any form of harassment or manipulation, the allowance stops entirely." Arthur had left me more than a will. He had left me a weapon. That evening, I returned home with a new understanding of my situation. I was not a helpless victim waiting to be devoured by my own family. I was a woman with resources, intelligence, and allies. But I was also curious to see exactly how far Dan and Chloe were willing to go with their charade. I stopped by an electronics store and purchased several small security cameras, the kind advertised for parents to monitor babysitters. The young salesperson was helpful in explaining how they connected to my smartphone and could record everything. Technology had advanced considerably since my museum curator days, but I was still capable of learning. Over the next few days, I watched Dan and Chloe implement their campaign against me. They hid my reading glasses and then expressed concern when I couldn't find them. Chloe rearranged items in the kitchen and then commented on my forgetfulness when I couldn't locate the coffee filters. Dan changed my doctor's appointment without telling me, and then acted worried when I arrived on the wrong day. I played along, allowing myself to seem confused and slightly disoriented. It was surprisingly easy to act befuddled when you knew people were watching for signs of mental decline. I repeated stories, misplaced items intentionally, and occasionally called Dan by his father's name. Each incident was carefully documented by my hidden cameras, showing the manipulative behavior they thought I couldn't see. The performance was exhausting, but it was also enlightening. I began to understand how many elderly people fell victim to this kind of systematic undermining. When everyone around you insists you are failing, it becomes easy to believe it yourself. Fortunately, I had the advantage of knowing exactly what game was being played. The charade continued for 2 weeks, until Chloe apparently decided I wasn't deteriorating quickly enough for their timeline. One Thursday afternoon, she arrived at my house with a woman she introduced as Mrs. Hartwell, a consultant from Golden Years Senior Living Community. Mrs. Hartwell was professionally compassionate, speaking to me in the slow, overly enunciated way people use with children or the mentally impaired. She talked about the wonderful community they offered, the medical care on site, and the peace of mind it would provide my family. I listened politely for about 10 minutes before I decided the performance had gone on long enough. Mrs. Hartwell, I said, interrupting her description of their craft room activities, I appreciate you taking the time to visit, but I believe you've been brought here under false pretenses. I am completely mentally competent and have no need for your services. I turned to Chloe, who was staring at me with obvious shock. And Chloe, I continued, my voice taking on the authority I had once used with unruly graduate students, I would appreciate it if you never again brought strangers into my home without my explicit permission. This house belongs to me, and these decisions are mine to make. The transformation in the room was immediate. Chloe's mask of concern slipped away, revealing the calculating woman I had overheard in my library. Dan, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly looked uncertain and slightly afraid. Mrs. Hartwell, clearly sensing the shift in dynamics, gathered her brochures quickly. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she said diplomatically. Perhaps we should reschedule when everyone has had time to think things through. After she left, the confrontation I had been anticipating finally erupted. Dan stood up, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Mom, can't you see what's happening? You're putting yourself in danger. We're only trying to help you. Help me? I repeated, my voice steady, despite the turmoil in my chest. Help me by lying to medical professionals? Help me by hiding my belongings and then expressing concern about my memory? Help me by discussing my mental state with lawyers behind my back? Chloe tried to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I had spent a lifetime commanding attention in lecture halls and museum boardrooms, and I wasn't finished. Your help, Daniel, comes with a price tag of about $2 million, doesn't it? Your help means I lose my home, my independence, and my dignity, so that you can pay off your business debts and maintain the lifestyle you've become accustomed to on my dime. The silence that followed was deafening. Dan's face went through several expressions before settling on something between guilt and defiance. Chloe, meanwhile, was clearly recalculating her options. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from Dan's attorney Mr. Fletcher, requesting a meeting to discuss my future care needs. The letter was professionally worded but carried an unmistakable threat. Maya and I agreed to the meeting, which would take place at Fletcher's office the following Monday. Maya spent the weekend preparing our response while I tried to process the emotional reality of what was happening. I was about to go to war with my only child, and while I was confident in our legal position, the personal cost was devastating. I kept thinking about the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the garden, insisting they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. Where had that sweet child gone? Monday arrived gray and drizzling, which seemed appropriate for the occasion. Fletcher's office was predictably impressive. All dark wood and leather-bound books designed to intimidate. Dan and Chloe sat across from Maya and me at a polished conference table that probably cost more than most people's cars. Fletcher began with a presentation about my supposed decline, complete with photographs Dan had taken of me, looking confused, and testimonials from neighbors about my odd behavior. It was a thorough performance, and I had to admire the thoroughness even as it appalled me. When Fletcher finished his presentation with a recommendation that Dan be granted immediate guardianship for my own protection, Maya smiled in a way that would have terrified me if I had been on the receiving end. Mr. Fletcher, Maya began, pulling out a thick folder. I appreciate the time you've put into this presentation. However, I believe you've been provided with incomplete and inaccurate information about Mrs. Reed's condition. She handed him a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation I had undergone the previous week with one of the city's most respected geriatricians. The evaluation confirmed not only my mental competency, but praised my cognitive function as exceptional for someone my age. Fletcher's confident expression began to waver as he read the medical report. But Maya wasn't finished. I'd also like to present the will and trust documents prepared by Mrs. Docu, Reed's late husband, Arthur Reed. Maya placed the legal documents on the table with deliberate ceremony. Mr. Reed was quite prescient in his concerns about potential family conflicts over his estate. As Fletcher read Arthur's trust provisions, his face went pale. The documents were ironclad, crafted by one of the city's most prestigious estate planning firms. If anyone attempted to challenge my competency or gain unauthorized control of my assets, the trust would activate immediately, removing Dan from any inheritance considerations until he could demonstrate financial responsibility and emotional stability. But Maya had saved the best for last. She pulled out her tablet and connected it to the room's presentation screen. I think you'll find this final piece of evidence particularly illuminating, she said. The video compilation began playing, showing clearly edited footage from my hidden cameras. The first clip showed Chloe deliberately hiding my car keys and then later expressing concern about my forgetfulness. The second showed Dan changing my medical appointments and then acting worried when I appeared confused about the timing. The final and most damaging clip was audio from their original conversation in my library, discussing their plan to have me declared incompetent. The effect was immediate and devastating. Chloe went white and began stammering excuses. Dan stared at the screen as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Fletcher, clearly recognizing the legal implications, stood up abruptly. I believe this meeting is concluded, he announced. I will no longer be representing Mr. Reed in this matter. He gathered his materials and left the room without another word, clearly trying to salvage his professional reputation. In the silence that followed, Dan finally looked directly at me for the first time all morning. Mom, I'm so sorry. We were desperate, and I let things get out of control. Please, can we work something out? But I was looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. The man I had raised would never have conspired to rob his own mother of her dignity and independence. I didn't know this person sitting across from me, begging for forgiveness only because he had been caught. Maya filled the silence with the practical details of our next steps. According to Arthur's trust provisions, the family home would be sold, and the proceeds used to establish a charitable foundation in Arthur's name, supporting young architects just starting their careers. I would move to a luxury apartment and live comfortably on my trust income for the rest of my life. Dan would receive a modest monthly allowance sufficient for basic living expenses, but not enough to maintain his current lifestyle or pay off his business debts. The allowance would continue only as long as he made no attempt to contact or harass me. As we prepared to leave, Chloe turned on Dan with fury that had been building since the moment my video started playing. "This is all your fault," she screamed. "Your stupidity has cost us everything. I'm done with this family and done with you." She stormed out, leaving Dan sitting alone at the conference table, finally understanding the full consequences of his choices. 6 months later, I found myself back at Dulles Airport. But this time, the circumstances were entirely different. I was finally making that trip to California. But now it was as a free woman who had successfully defended her independence and dignity. I no longer carried Arthur's mahogany box with me. I had buried it with him in a private ceremony, finally letting go of the need to hold on to the past for security. The safety key he had given me wasn't a physical object after all. It was the knowledge that I was stronger and more resourceful than I had ever imagined. Maya had texted me that morning with an update I had been expecting. Dan's creditors had finally moved to foreclose on his business assets. His development company was officially bankrupt, and he had been forced to sell his condo and car to cover personal debts. He was now living in a studio apartment and working as a junior draftsman at an architectural firm, essentially starting over at 45. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, but I also felt no guilt. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. The allowance from Arthur's trust would ensure he wouldn't be homeless or hungry, but his days of living beyond his means were over. As my plane lifted off from Dulles, I looked down at the city where I had spent most of my adult life. Washington would always be my home, but I was no longer defined by the house I had lost or the son who had betrayed me. I was beginning the next chapter of my life, and for the first time in years, I was the one writing the story. The flight attendant offered me a drink, and I accepted a glass of champagne. It seemed appropriate for a celebration, even if it was a celebration of survival rather than victory. I had learned that sometimes the greatest triumph is simply refusing to be destroyed by those who are supposed to love you most. My great-niece was waiting for me in California. A new generation, with no knowledge of family betrayals or broken trust. With her, I could be simply a great aunt, bringing gifts and stories. With her, I could remember what family was supposed to feel like. As the plane settled into its cruising altitude, I opened the book I had brought for the journey. It was a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt, another woman who had learned to find strength in the face of personal disappointment. The first chapter began with a quote that seemed particularly appropriate for my situation. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I smiled and settled back in my seat. Consent was exactly what I had finally learned to withhold. At 75, I had discovered that it's never too late to save yourself, even from the people you love most. Perhaps especially from them. The sun was setting behind us as we flew west, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. I had always loved sunsets, but this one felt different. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and I was finally ready to see what came next.